Welcome everybody to the BERA Presidential Seminar, Anti-Racist Education in Northern Ireland, Progress, Problems and Prospects. I'm Dr. Marlon Moncrief, the President of BERA. I'm very pleased to be with you in our focus on Northern Ireland today. Before this, I want to share some of my lived connections with people from Northern Ireland too. Firstly, at primary school in London where I grew up was my wonderful Year 5 teacher, Miss Milliken. This is important. I remember she gave much warmth and love to all of us in the classroom, a multicultural classroom with children of parents from all over the world. You never forget a good teacher and an outstanding school. My primary school was an outstanding school, and I always felt it was a safe space as an integrated and mixed community, one of encouragement and pride. I also remember some of our whole school assemblies were led by parents of different ethnic and religious backgrounds, so that we as a community could learn about each other and our differences and our areas of common ground too. Spiritual, moral, social and cultural education, SMSC as one. I think teachers are at their best when they're empowered to know how to fuse together the local and global context in creating a sense of belonging for all in the community that they belong to. My wonderful primary school experience were indeed why I chose to become a primary school teacher myself at the beginning of my career as an educator. I also have cousins who have a mother from Northern Ireland. You wouldn't know this about me, but I do. And I remember when I was a child visiting their house, she used to make the best cup of Horlicks before we used to go to bed. It's true. When I was younger, I also used to follow, unfortunately, a football team called Queen's Park Rangers. But the number 5 player was the excellent Northern Ireland international Alan MacDonald. Now, I used to play football when I was younger as a defender as well, and it's a coincidence that I used to wear the number 5 shirt as well. I'd like to think that Alan MacDonald had some good influence on my play. I travelled to Belfast for the first time earlier this year to Queen's University for the Let's Not Talk About Racism conference led by Timothy Agrin and Dina Balugi. And what a magnificent building Queen's is too. It's so impressive. From the conference, I left with new knowledge from a range of perspectives, including the historical, the philosophical, the political, the sociological, and the educational. But most significantly for me was the personal lived experiences given by a range of different people from different ethnic groups, speaking about their experiences of racism and aiming to champion anti-racism. All have furthered the need for championing anti-racism and anti-racist praxis, according to the increasing racially diverse society of people that Northern Ireland continues in becoming. It was at this conference that I got to meet Rebecca Loader face-to-face for the first time. I actually reached out to Rebecca long before this via social media, as I'd seen and read her 2023 work with colleagues from Queen's on the experiences of education among minority ethnic groups in Northern Ireland. This work connected with my own interests, particularly in my seminal research began in 2012 in examining approaches to curriculum, teaching and learning about mass migration to the British Isles over the ages. I wanted to know from my research what were teachers' engagement or lack of engagement with minority ethnic group experiences in curriculum, teaching and learning. And all of this research is accounted for in my 2020 Palgrave book, which is a bit blurry there. There you go, Decolonizing the History Curriculum, Eurocentrism and Primary Schooling. Yeah, good plug. My more recent book commission led to the publication of the BERA Guide to Decolonizing the Curriculum. It's coming up blurry there, you might be able to see that, there you go. Okay, and I was very keen for Rebecca and her colleagues to contribute to this for sharing fresh perspectives from Northern Ireland. And this is it's a very nice contribution too. With her colleagues from Queen's, they talk clearly about the hermeneutical marginalization of children from minority ethnic groups, giving effect to epistemic injustice. This particularly in relation to the primary school curriculum teaching and learning for RE, for religious education. So Rebecca and colleagues, they provide clear arguments for developing epistemic justice through curriculum, teaching, and learning. And it's the extent to which the brand new curriculum recommendations for Northern Ireland and the processes this might endure for building bridges to racial equity and inclusion can address the lacuna that Loda and her colleagues speak of. This will be ready for our discussion today, I think. In fact, it is the BERA Guide to Decolonising the Curriculum work and its publication last November, from which my Four Nations presidential seminar series entitled Advancing Anti-Racism emerges from. As president, in developing further the interest of our membership around this theme, I wanted to raise the profile of anti-racist work in education and educational research and policy and practice occurring across the Four Nations. So my presidential seminar series is a knowledge exchange conversation for sharing understanding and learning about where we are, where we might be going in our attempts to overcome the wicked issue of racism in society. So my central question of the entire seminar series is, how might anti-racist education provide leadership for teaching and learning about the issues of diversities of societies, ensuring children and young people are represented? The seminar one, held at the University of Edinburgh last November, with a focus on Scotland, you can find the discussion contributions and findings. They're written up in BERA Research Intelligence 162. So go to that particular publication. And for seminar 2, held at Leeds Beckett University, with a focus on England, the contributions can be found in BERA Research Intelligence, a bit blurry, there you go, 163. And for seminar 3, held at the Senedd in Wales in May this year, with a focus on anti-racism in education in Wales, the seminar contributions and findings are written up in BERA Research Intelligence 164. Okay, just brief write-ups, and hope to do a fuller write-up in 2026. Please do also consult with the BERA webpage in order to read through the essays written by each of the lead academics in those seminars. And now for a brief review of Rebecca's essay, which accompanies this seminar and provides insight to the Northern Ireland context. Rebecca cites Russell 2025 to inform us that although the region remains the least diverse part of the UK, ethnic and cultural plurality is an increasing feature of contemporary Northern Ireland. And in the responses to my pre-seminar questionnaire, many of you have said this too as being a noticeable causal phenomenon of the racial demographics in Northern Ireland since the signing of the Good Friday Agreement. Rebecca cites McBee 2015 and Macau 2021 in discussing how issues of migration and racial justice have largely been marginalised in post-agreement peace and conflict transformation processes in education. And here for me, personally, it seems as though the post-agreement peace and transformation process might reframe an existence with each other without exception to accommodate in the emergence of new others. That's my own perception. Can be challenged on that. I'm happy. She uses the PSNI 2025 to inform us that racially motivated violence in Northern Ireland is at its highest recorded levels. And she reminds us of the racist violence and disorder last summer in Belfast, and also the racist violent disorder in Ballymena in 2025. These events, or these incidents, didn't go unnoticed in some of your responses to my pre-seminar questions. Some suggestions given were that the emergence of new others, migrants, over the years, in an existing system for society in which many young people are jobless or feel impoverished, has given effect to this angst, leading to racially motivated intimidation and violence. The racial demographic of change in Northern Ireland is happening for real. So what is the best way for living in peace with each other and with new others? How might educators How might educational researchers and education help in this? Well, Rebecca states that the ultimate removal of selection remains fundamental to social and racial justice. And some of you mentioned this in your comments in the pre-seminar questions as well. Rebecca also points to recent cases of schools seeking to convert to integrated status as a means of developing a more culturally and religiously plural ethos, seeing this as one means by which educators can challenge the normativity of white Christianity in schools. She also cites the recent work of Donnelly and colleagues where, like many of you in your responses to the questions of my questionnaire, speak to the urgent need for the lack of anti-racist training and racial literacy training for new and existing teachers in Northern Ireland, made more urgent by the change in racial demographics. And I think here, alongside the work that we're going to hear today from the speakers, it might be useful that Northern Ireland seek to learn from the Building Racial Literacy programme enacted in policy in Scotland. An evaluation of this policy was a key feature of Presidential Seminar 1 at the University of Edinburgh. So that's a reference point too. In speaking to the Northern Ireland primary school curriculum and in mirroring the work of the findings of Moncrieff 2020, Rebecca spotlights a lack of, or what might be seen as tokenistic representations of Black figures such as Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King, and Rosa Parks, whilst key figures and events from Black and Asian British history and Irish history are absent. And here again, it might be useful that Northern Ireland's anti-racist educators in the work that they're doing now, but they might be able to seek to learn from the mandatory teaching of Black history for schools in Wales, as discussed and evaluated in Presidential Seminar 3 at the Senedd. What has been the reception to that in Wales, which has a teaching workforce that is 98% white? Maybe Northern Ireland could learn about the experiences of Wales from that. So Rebecca states that diversity tends to be regarded as a concern only for schools with multicultural intakes, and that where teachers lack knowledge and confidence to incorporate diverse contexts and experiences, this approach may mean that pupils continue to experience a curriculum that is white and Eurocentric. And this is a common pattern in my research and people before me and people doing the research now. It's a perception that made me think back to the educational research work done by Chris Gain in the 1980s and the 1990s. Some of you might know of his work, shared in his book titles. No Problem Here was one of his book titles. Still No Problem Here was another one of his book titles. And one I like the best is We're All White, Thanks. We're All Right, Thanks. We're All White, Thanks. And it's all about denial and abnegation by dominant white schools to address racism and anti-racism in a professional way. Chris Gain. Rebecca has provided us with a solid essay for thinking and for discussion today. I could have spoken for at least an hour about this, and I've written many, many pages in response to this. There's so much information in this paper. I do encourage you to read it if you haven't yet. I thank Rebecca once again for this contribution to my seminar series. I want to thank the speakers who have come to share their knowledge today as well. We couldn't do this without you. And I want to thank all of you who've taken part in the pre-seminar questions. These are to help with my own learning and analysis of this experience. And I hope to share a write-up with you through Bureau Research Intelligence in the near future. Thank you once more for coming along to this seminar. I'll now hand over to Rebecca, who will add more discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marlon. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for joining. I'm just going to share my slides. We can. Hopefully that's working. So yes, the title of what I want to discuss today is Anti-Racist Education, Urgency and Opportunity. And as Marlon mentioned, that's the title of the paper that I've provided, and I'll be talking through some of the themes over the next 10 to 15 minutes. So, as Marlon kindly mentioned, this presentation is really from a body of work that we've been undertaking, myself and other colleagues, Erica and Aisling, who are also part of today's seminar, over the past 5 years or so on the experiences of ethnic minority groups in Northern Ireland. So we've have a main report that's available for people to read. We've also got a young people's report, it's the one in the top right of that slide, and a series of more academic papers, including the chapter for the book that Marlon has mentioned. And these are all available, well, the papers and the reports are available open access for anybody who's interested in following up some of what we're discussing today. So I wanted to start by asking the question of what is meant by anti-racist education. So we often think of anti-racist education in terms of promoting respect for diversity, non-discrimination, prejudice reduction, but anti-racism is a concept which also goes beyond that. And its aim is to actively tackle all forms of racism, personal, social, and institutional. So it understands racism in the approach that I'm using as a multi-level phenomenon. And in education, the substance of addressing racial inequity must identify and work toward the elimination of racist policies in every area of education, from curriculum decision making to institutional policy making. And if we're adopting an anti-racist lens in education and applying these perspectives, then we'll be thinking about everything from what does the curriculum structure and content look like? What kind of pedagogies are teachers using? What assessment approaches are employed in education? What are the educational and school structures? The school policies on everything from uniform to discipline, funding from government level, which ties into education policy decision making, staffing and staff career development, the hidden curriculum. So what are schools communicating to pupils, even unintentionally, and the political rhetoric that surrounds education and diversity. And colleagues will be talking about some of these things as the seminar goes on today. So why the urgency in the title that I've used? Why the urgency for anti-racist education in Northern Ireland? Well, Marlon has addressed that point quite well. We know that race hate crime is at record levels in the region. Research shows that first generation migrant pupils perform less well than their peers in reading, maths and science, even accounting for linguistic and socioeconomic backgrounds. That's not a trend that is observed in the Republic of Ireland, so there's something specific about Northern Ireland here. Second generation migrant children in Northern Ireland report lower levels of well-being and school belonging than their peers and lower perceptions of school safety. And Northern Ireland, as Marlon has alluded to, lags behind other parts of the UK in terms of its progress on anti-racism. There's an anti-racism in education programme, which is extensive in Scotland. We've heard about the work that's being undertaken, particularly led by DARPL in Wales, and which has included the mandating of Black and global majority history in Welsh schools. So Northern Ireland has a lot to learn from other places. We don't need to come to this completely new, but we do need to come to it more quickly. And so going back to the slide earlier, which was looking at the kinds of things that we might want to consider in anti-racist education, and looking particularly at the features of the Northern Ireland education system. One thing that we need to start with when we're thinking about anti-racist education in Northern Ireland is the education structures. Often we start with the curriculum, but in Northern Ireland, we have to be aware that we're operating in a system where 97% of schools have an explicitly Christian ethos, and there's no state-funded provision for non-Christian schools. Dominant school sectors have traditionally, given the history of Ireland, served to reproduce Catholic, Irish and Protestant British identities, which have been racialised as white. And we can see tacitly the legacy of that in the system that we have now. And we can see that in research. So research has found that minoritized pupils often minimize expressions of cultural and religious identities in schools, which are dominated by a Christian ethos. And they can be expected by peers to ascribe to the separate identities that schools uphold. Thinking about education structures and assessment, as Marlon has mentioned, Northern Ireland retains a system of academic selection across the whole region. It's the only part of the UK to do so. There are pockets in England, but it's not across the whole region. And grammar school entrance is determined by a test at age 10 or 11. And selection can compound inequality by socioeconomic background, ethnicity, and migration background. So, for example, the transfer test is only available in English or Irish. Parents, we know parents from migrant backgrounds, from Irish traveller backgrounds, Black and the other ethnic group, they tend to have be more likely to experience socioeconomic disadvantage, less likely to be able to pay for the tuition, which increases significantly people's chances of gaining access to grammar schools. And also because the transfer test examines knowledge that pupils acquire through the curriculum at Key Stage 2, recent migrants have limited opportunity to acquire that knowledge. And potentially as a consequence of some of these things, we know that Irish traveller pupils, Black pupils, and pupils from the other ethnic group, as well as pupils from newcomer backgrounds who are English or Irish language learners, are underrepresented at grammar schools. So another challenge within education in Northern Ireland is, and we know from previous research, including the research that we've undertaken, that racist bullying remains a significant issue at school. And that's been recognised in a number of strategies, including the racial equality strategy, which includes the commitment to identify ways to tackle racist bullying in schools, and the children and young people strategy, which includes the rights of focus on the rights of children and young people who experience racism. However, it's important to recognise that neither of these have particular targets around addressing racism. There's one measure in the racial equality strategy which hasn't been met. The major lever for addressing racism and racist bullying in Northern Ireland is the Addressing Bullying in Schools Act, and there's been a significant amount of work done by the Addressing Bullying in Schools team in EA that I want to recognise here. At policy level, though, there are a number of shortcomings of this. So recording of a racist motivation is supposed to be part of what schools do. A recording of any type of motivation for bullying, but recording of a racist motivation depends on staff recognising racism where it occurs. Yet we know that there is a lack of consensus about what constitute racist acts among staff. There's no requirement on schools to share data on bullying motivations or for this to be published in any form. So the prevalence of racist bullying remains somewhat uncertain. We know it's significant, but we don't know to what degree necessarily. And there's also limited supportive infrastructure around the Addressing Bullying in Schools Act. So for anti-racism in the curriculum, anti-racist training for staff, or resources for developing racial literacy. I'm going to talk about the curriculum as part of the second panel, so I won't speak about that too much now. But we are in a period of transition in the curriculum in Northern Ireland. There are strengths and weaknesses of the existing curriculum. There are opportunities and questions raised by the curriculum review relating to the potential for embedding anti-racist education in teaching in Northern Ireland. And we'll look at that in the second panel. But it's possibly one of the most live issues in the region at the moment. So much of what I've discussed so far is around the policy level and the need, as Kathleen Donnelly and her colleagues have mentioned, to support the work that's often been undertaken at school level or at community level with policy that reflects the need of schools, of teachers, for support, for funding, for resources that can really begin to take this work forward in a more concerted way. It is important, though, to acknowledge the work that is going on in Northern Ireland, in individual schools, in school sectors, and in community organisations. And I'm delighted that in this seminar, we've got a number of speakers who will be referring to the work that they're undertaking. So this includes the Northwest Migrants Forum, which is looking at how to develop Black history curriculum and resources for schools. The work of the EA Intercultural Education Service and the Schools of Sanctuary movement, which is promoting anti-racist principles through the supporting schools to obtain the School of Sanctuary Award, and the work of the National Education Union, which has been developing a framework for an anti-racist approach for use in schools. And we're going to hear about some of those as this session goes on. But really, what we need, as I've mentioned, is a concerted strategy that supports this anti-racist work. And the current transformation agenda in Northern Ireland is the opportunity that we have. So the structure of the programme will be that we'll have two panels. The first panel is looking at curriculum, so curriculum reform and the opportunities that presents and what that might look like. So unfortunately, Lucy couldn't make the time of the session today, but we've got some input from her following her curriculum review. And then we've got Naomi talking from the Northwest Migrants Forum about the work that they're undertaking. In the second panel session, it's looking at embedding anti-racism in policy and practice. And we've got 4 speakers talking about policy, research and practice. So delighted that we've got Chris, Erica, Charlotte and Israel joining for that part of the session. And then we will finish with some closing remarks from me and Marlon. So I will stop sharing there and I will invite Garvin at Bera, if you wouldn't mind sharing Lucy's presentation.
Good afternoon. I'd like to thank Marlon, Rebecca and the other organisers of this event for the kind invitation to participate. And I'm sorry I'm not able to join you live. Nevertheless, it's a pleasure to have the chance to reflect on such a fundamental question in education: how the curriculum in Northern Ireland can help young people to understand difference, to recognise injustice and to build a more inclusive society. Over the past year, through the independent review of the Northern Ireland curriculum, and then more recently via the new Curriculum Task Force, we've been exploring what kind of curriculum best supports those aims, one that prepares young people to live together in a diverse, interconnected world. Today I want to share a little bit more about how that vision is being developed, how the review was carried out, the framework it proposes, and how this approach can help ensure that schools in Northern Ireland actively support equality, inclusion and anti-racism. My remit in the review was to examine the Northern Ireland curriculum in depth, its purpose, design, content and implementation. To do this, we drew on a wide range of evidence, evaluations of the current curriculum, research on effective curriculum design from around the world, and insights from cognitive science, particularly around how knowledge supports learning and understanding. The result of this process was a set of recommendations designed to create a curriculum that is purpose-led, knowledge-rich, continuous and coherent, specific and focused, and inclusive and flexible. One that helps all young people from every background to develop the understanding, empathy, and capabilities they need to thrive together in a diverse society. A capabilities approach provides a coherent theoretical foundation for the new framework. It links the knowledge and skills taught through subjects to the broad aims of education by focusing on the capabilities that knowledge, widely understood, makes possible. This draws on the capabilities approach to human development associated with Amartya Sen and Martha Nussbaum, defining capabilities as the doings and beings that people can achieve if they so choose. The new curriculum should therefore aim to develop people's capabilities in ways that give them real freedom in their lives to choose what activities they are able to undertake and the kinds of people they are able to be. This would include capabilities that underpin the important functioning of being anti-racist, which might, for example, drawing directly on Nussbaum's work, include the ability to live with and toward others, to recognise and show concern for other human beings, to engage in various forms of social interaction, to be able to imagine the situation of another and to have compassion for that situation. We haven't yet defined what these capabilities will be within the new framework, but in doing so, we're drawing on responses to questionnaires on the purpose of education previously completed by parents and wider society in Northern Ireland, as well as asking 2 questions on capabilities in a curriculum survey which will shortly be made public. So please do contribute to this if you're based in Northern Ireland, and we'd love to hear your views. Central to the development of these capabilities is a knowledge-rich curriculum. This is based on the understanding that deep and connected knowledge forms the foundation for complex thinking skills. It recognises the fundamental importance of knowledge for young people's participation in society, while avoiding any return to a fixed canon of facts. Instead, it's grounded in powerful disciplinary knowledge, forms of knowledge that are systematically developed within disciplines and that enable learners to think beyond their personal experiences. Such knowledge provides new ways of thinking about the world and helps learners to engage in political and moral debates. A related feature of the new curriculum framework for Northern Ireland is that it will be continuous and coherent, designed so that knowledge and skills are carefully sequenced over time. Each stage of learning will build on what has come before, helping pupils to connect ideas, recognise relationships, and understand and find new meaning in topics they study, seeing them through the lens of everything that has come before. Rather than a collection of disconnected topics, the curriculum will provide a structured journey through which understanding develops cumulatively and meaningfully. Equally important is the question of scope, selecting content that is wide enough to represent the richness and complexity of human experience, yet focused enough for deep understanding to take root. When coherence and scope are brought together in this way, the curriculum becomes a powerful means for helping pupils to understand both the diversity of the world and the injustices that shape it. This approach ensures that the themes of race and cultural diversity are not treated as occasional or optional topics, but are woven throughout the curriculum in a connected and a deliberate way. Pupils will study different times, places, and cultures, learning about societies and belief systems that have shaped the modern world. Through this, they will see both what unites people and how diversity enriches communities. The same principle applies to the study of social inequality and injustice. A purpose-led, knowledge-rich curriculum should include a socially broad range of perspectives, giving visibility and voice to different groups and examining how ideas, institutions, and power structures have affected people's lives. It should link global and local experiences, helping people see how patterns of inequality emerge, how they're challenged, and how change can occur. By ensuring that these themes are developed cumulatively through coherent sequencing and appropriate scope, the curriculum will support pupils to build informed and reflective understandings of diversity, identity, and justice. In doing so, a knowledge-rich curriculum that is broad in scope will naturally reflect the diversity of young people in Northern Ireland, helping every learner to see themselves and others in what they study, and to recognise their shared place in Northern Ireland society. Taken together, these principles form the foundations of a curriculum that does more than transmit knowledge. It helps to shape the kind of society we want to build. A curriculum that is purpose-led, knowledge-rich, coherent, and inclusive equips young people with the understanding, empathy, and discernment they need to challenge prejudice and injustice wherever they encounter them. By ensuring that all pupils have access to powerful knowledge, and that this knowledge reflects the diversity of the world they live in, we create the conditions for genuine inclusion. This is not about adding new content on racism or equality as a supplement or an add-on. It's about embedding content which supports anti-racism within the very structure of what we teach. In doing so, the curriculum becomes both a mirror in which every child can see themselves and a window through which they can understand others. Thank you very much for the opportunity to contribute today, and I really look forward to listening back to the other presentations and the subsequent discussions. Thank you. Good afternoon.
So that was Lucy Crehan. She has, as you probably gathered, she has been leading the Northern Ireland Curriculum Review over the past year or so. And we expect to have draft proposals for the curriculum within, I think, the next year. So unfortunately, Joanne Hughes, who was meant to be here today, was unable to join us. So I'm going to just give a response now to Lucy's review. So if I will just share. Okay, so I've chosen this title because I think it's quite fundamental to discussions around the curriculum review, particularly the choice of moving towards a knowledge-rich curriculum. I'm going to talk initially about some of the strengths of the current curriculum before moving into some reflections on the proposals that Lucy has provided. It's probably worth saying that, as I mentioned earlier, the Northern Ireland curriculum that we're working with, it's from 2007 it was introduced. And that was in a very different kind of context, as Lucy acknowledged, a very different social context because it was developed immediately post-conflict, a very different demographic context as well, not only in terms of numbers of people migrating into Northern Ireland, but also the migration profile and where people were moving from. So it is somewhat dated now. It is in need of a review, and we've heard from Lucy about the outcomes of the review that she was appointed to lead. It is worth saying, though, that despite the curriculum being almost 20 years old, it does have a number of strengths in terms of integrating diversity and social justice across all areas of learning. So the curriculum that we have now is structured around 12 cross-curricular key elements, which should be embedded across all areas of learning or subjects. And these provide the opportunity for the integration of different kinds of knowledge, looking at ways of knowledge production, experiences of people in different parts of the world, and experiences of people in Northern Ireland who are from Northern Ireland or have moved into. And we can see that in this slide. So each area of learning should include a focus on citizenship, including respecting the equal rights of others, cultural understanding, recognising the richness and diversity of cultural influences, mutual understanding, so respecting and cooperating with others, and resolving conflict. The curriculum also includes commitments to developing skills of critical analysis, democratic participation, conflict resolution, and respect for difference, which reflect the period in which it was developed, as I mentioned, immediately in the 5 to 10 years after the Good Friday Agreement, but increasingly in a context where racism at the moment is being fueled by disinformation among groups operating outside democratic structures. These commitments can assume renewed importance. At the same time, there are a number of limitations of the existing curriculum, particularly concerning the representation of the histories and experiences of the global majority. So As Marlon mentioned, Black history is only really referenced in the current curriculum in relation to experiences of suffering and subjugation. So you can see here focus on slavery that crops up on several occasions, and apartheid. The figures that are the focus of this area of the curriculum include Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, Nelson Mandela, who are obviously important, but there's no corresponding focus also on significant figures from significant Black and minority ethnic figures from Northern Ireland, from Britain, from Ireland. And so the effect of that is to sustain an image of a racially homogenous society, which has just recently been interrupted by migration. And that not only serves to marginalise Black and Asian and minority ethnic perspectives, but can also feed white nationalism and is also inaccurate, as Naomi will talk about shortly. The treatment of racism is also something that is a weakness in the current curriculum. I mean, in recent years, we've seen increasing calls for the development of racial literacy through the curriculum, which means providing teachers and pupils with an understanding of the socially constructed nature of race and racism as a multi-level system of oppression. But in the curriculum, we see racism addressed importantly, but only as an individual phenomenon. And that obviously is an aspect of anti-racist education, but it also circumscribes how racism is experienced in the rest of the curriculum, and is indicative of what Joanne Hughes has described as a wider lack of engagement with issues of race and power. So it's encouraging to hear Lucy discuss in the previous presentation that these issues will be considered in the curriculum review, and the revised curriculum ought to provide opportunities to look at that multi-level phenomenon. So the curriculum review, which Lucy was describing, came up with 5 principles which should lead the design of the revised curriculum. And I put these on the screen. From an anti-racist perspective, probably the first, second, and fifth are the most of the most interest and relevance. So quite a small but significant change, as was mentioned in Lucy's presentation, was moving away from this idea of the aim of the curriculum being to empower pupils to achieve their potential, to focusing on supporting them to develop their capabilities. And this is potentially particularly important because there's been a tendency to perceive potential as something that is limited. And some groups of pupils have particularly suffered from low expectations from schools about what their potential achievement might be. So particularly there's research showing that there are low expectations of pupils from Black Caribbean backgrounds, from Irish traveller backgrounds, Roma backgrounds. So hopefully a shift towards focusing on capabilities and rather than potentially finite potential will be beneficial for some of these groups. Also emphasising a curriculum that is inclusive and flexible, reflecting the full range of experience of families across NI. We've already heard about that is important and recognises explicitly the issues within the current curriculum in perpetuating stereotypes of the global South and of the heritages of people in Northern Ireland. But some of the critical issues around the curriculum review, I just want to raise a couple of them. Lucy mentioned the basis of the knowledge-rich approach in cognitive science. And there have been criticisms of the universalization of cognitive science because the research on which it rests has often excluded questions of culture, questions of background and context, and how that may affect how children learn. So assuming that there's a single way of doing things may be questionable, particularly for children from racialized minorities. The issue of what powerful knowledge is also a consideration. In the proposals for the curriculum review, there's the Department of Education leans quite heavily on what happened in England after 2010. And with the development of the reforms under Michael Gove, which also favoured a knowledge-rich approach, but research has been critical of that as too often meaning the knowledge of the white cultural elite and the marginalisation of other forms of knowledge. And also, while there is an emphasis in the curriculum review on achieving representation, this is left to schools through the enacted curriculum and the resources available to them. And we know from our existing research, as Marlon mentioned at the start of this seminar, that can result in schools with highly diverse populations engaging a bit more with this, other schools choosing not to. We really need to move, in my view, to a place where, as in Wales, some of this is becoming mandatory so that we can ensure that all pupils, not merely pupils from minoritised backgrounds, but all pupils have the opportunity for a curriculum that moves beyond a white and Eurocentric approach. And just to finish, these are a couple of quotes from pupils that we have spoken to through our research, and they really speak to the importance of a decolonial, anti-racist approach to curriculum reform. Transform Ed provides an opportunity to do this, and it's vital to ensure that these principles are embedded for the benefit of all pupils in Northern Ireland. So I'm now going to hand over to Naomi, who's going to speak about the particular work that she has been involved in around developing resources on Black history.
Hello, sorry, I had a bit of difficulty unmuting myself there. Thank you for inviting me today to speak about our Black Heritage in Northern Ireland project. I am the lead researcher, so I have done the initial research on this project. I am now still a researcher, but I'm not involved in the day-to-day running. The team at Northwest Migrants Forum, led by Inaz, runs the day-to-day, and then myself as lead researcher, and we also have Chantel from Liverpool and Dr. Eben Joseph from Dublin, who are supporting the work that we're doing in this project. I think one of the key things, all these pictures in this slide relate directly to Northern Ireland, and none of these are Ireland, and none of these images are typically what we associate with history in Northern Ireland for many reasons. So we have approached this project with a particular ethos in mind, and that's the idea of inclusive histories, that history, and not just history, but lessons in the curriculum, should be representative and inclusive of all learners, not just the dominant communities. And it should be broadly reflective of the ways that we have all been shaped by its our interactions with the wider world. And we have to tackle this myth of a historically sort of pure white society in the UK and Ireland. And this is particularly pervasive in Northern Ireland, where we essentially have two histories and nothing else is really talked about. So what we want to do through this project is recognise that there have been, particularly Black, but there has also been Black, Asian and other ethnic minorities in the UK and Ireland and Northern Ireland for centuries, not just over the past 20 years. Particularly in Northern Ireland, we talk a lot about post-conflict or post-ceasefire and the increase in migration in that period, but we have generations who have been here from minority communities for a very long time, and they've helped shaped Northern Ireland, not always visibly, because not all minorities have been visible, like the Huguenots and the Jewish communities and the Italians, but they have very much been part of our society for generations. And also recognising the legacy of colonialism, both globally and locally. And this can be particularly painful in Northern Ireland because that word colonialism has a very loaded implication locally as well. So it can be quite a painful word. So it's a word that we often talk about when we hear about decolonising the curriculum. But in Northern Ireland, a lot of people are very uncomfortable with that word. So we're not using that term, but that is the overarching background behind this project. And it's absolutely not about token inclusion. It's not about sticking a picture up of someone and saying, here's a story. That is part of the method, I guess, that we're talking about stories and individuals that many people will have never heard of. But ultimately, we want a whole paradigm shift in how people think about history in relation to Northern Ireland and how they think about our society. It's about making space for other philosophies and knowledge systems that maybe go beyond the usual that we're used to. What is common knowledge? How did Belfast develop, for example? How did our economy develop? It wasn't maybe in the way that we're often told. A lot of our wealth that built Belfast came from the slave economy, from the labour of enslaved people, not because we had people coming to our shores, but because of the produce that went through our ports. Also, of course, we are adopting an anti-racist framework as part of the essence of this work. And we want to examine whose viewpoints, whose stories, whose narratives are told. As has sort of been touched on, for those who are not familiar, Northern Ireland has 3 categories of identity, if you like. So you've got your PUL, your Protestant Unionist Loyalists, your Catholic Nationalist and Republican, and then this other category. It's usually tied to identity. So if you're from Nigeria and you're a Protestant, you're not a member of the PUL community, you are an other. And this is very, very problematic. There is historical and political reasons for this, but it means that people are being put into boxes that don't necessarily explain much about who they are. Who we are, our identity is often fluid, it's more hybrid, but we're put very firmly into these 3 boxes. And if you come from a minority ethnic group or minority religious group, you will often be referred to officially as an ethnic minority, which basically means anyone who is not part of the PULC in our community. So that includes white minorities like Eastern Europeans as well. In the education system, we have a particularly problematic word, and that is the term newcomer. And it is an umbrella term it's used sort of in wider society as well, but it's officially used by the Education Board. It's not just for foreign-born students who've arrived in Northern Ireland. In the common discussion it is, but officially it means someone who does not have satisfactory language skills. So you can have a pupil who has been born in Northern Ireland, but whose parents do not speak English as a first language, who do not have perhaps the required language skills, who will then be labelled a newcomer officially in schools, which is inherently problematic for identity. And then, of course, we have this term other. So you're classed as an other if you don't fit into the 2 boxes, which again can create this sense of othering, literal othering from birth. Whenever you're filling in the forms to go to school, you have to tick one of these 3 boxes. So children are being classified quite literally as other through the system. I'm not going to go too much into that because I could go into a rant, but it sort of really shows that the context. I know Rebecca has spoken about it and Marlon has spoken about it as well, but just to give some context of this project. And because Black and minority history is really not taught in any significant way, and if it is taught, it's taught in the sense of over in America, Martin Luther King, over in India, Gandhi, over there, this thing happened. It's not talked about as something that is part of Northern Irish identity, history, and that. So this can impact local lack of awareness of the global context of many things that are going on in the world, and also the contributions that impact us on a day-to-day basis. There's just kind of no awareness of this. That can impact children's individual sense of belonging, but also sense of acceptance. As Rebecca said, we have massive increase in racism in Northern Ireland. It's always been there, but the past couple of years it's been absolutely horrific, and year on year it's rising. And alongside that is bullying within schools, and a lot of that is down to this sort of sense that we have created this society and these outsiders are coming in and taking what is ours. And that is the narrative that has taken hold, and that is the narrative that we really want to push back against. And something like this, we hope, is part of that pushback on that narrative and that sense of identity of who we are as a society. I wasn't going to mention Rebecca's research because she is, she's written so much, and I know she was covering it today, but I see she also mentioned this one. This for me, I think is as well as all the fantastic research that Rebecca has done, this is really stark when you see it laid out like this in a graph. So this is well-being among children in Northern Ireland. So if you're born in Northern Ireland and both parents come from Northern Ireland, if you're first generation migrant in Northern Ireland, your sort of scores are relatively similar in terms of well-being. But if you are a second generation, so if one of your parents is of migrant heritage and you're born in Northern Ireland, your mental health outcomes, your subjective well-being is considerably lower than that of your peers. And this is not replicated in the south of Ireland. So there's something that we are doing fundamentally wrong. And I believe it's a mental health crisis. It's a social crisis that children of minority heritage in Northern Ireland are not being included in our sense of who we are. And it's having long-term, and it will have a long-term impact on our society and on our children. So fundamentally, Black history is our history. It's not a little add-on that we should do. It is part of our history here in Northern Ireland. Again, all these pictures are related to us. So this first picture, it was from the 18th century. It is a painting done in Ireland by an Irish painter of what we believe to be a Grimsman who was living in Ireland in the 18th century. In the middle picture, we have some American GIs, African-American GIs. Around 30,000 of them were stationed in Northern Ireland during World War II. And that picture on the other side there is of a very sad story, Max Orlando, who was killed in the Dunmurry train bombing. And again, minority history is completely written out of the history of the Troubles. There are around 30 victims of the Troubles from ethnic minority backgrounds. But when we talk about the Troubles, it's a very painful legacy that we have. We only talk about the two communities, the two dominant communities. So in terms of the Black History Project, there are two main elements. One is the exhibition. We currently have one exhibition, which is the past, which is the just been released, and I will talk about that in a minute. And the next piece will be the present. So we're going to be talking about contemporary figures, contemporary stories, and individual stories. That will be the next exhibition. We're also going to be, we also are looking into building resources so that teachers can incorporate some of these stories and some of these lessons in their lessons. And there will be a book at the end of this as well that will cover a lot of the information. So I just want to briefly talk about what I mean when I'm talking about Black history in Northern Ireland. What are we covering in this past exhibition? If you haven't already seen it, it's already been in Derry Central Library, Craig and Chantal and Strabane. It's currently in Northwest Regional College. Then in February, it will be going to Coleraine Library, then Dungiven, and it will be coming to Belfast in July 26, starting in Belfast Shankill Road Library, then the Falls Road Library, and then Belfast Central Library in a year from now, in September 2026. So I'm not going to give the full story away because I want people to see the exhibition, but I just want to cover what are we talking about when we're talking about history in Northern Ireland. First of all, we know that the people of African heritage came to Ireland as early as Viking times. We know that there were records from the 1700s of people working and living in Ireland from different ethnic backgrounds. We know that during World War II, there were thousands of African, we talk a lot about the American soldiers, but what we don't realize, there were entire units of Black soldiers who were stationed across Northern Ireland: Moneymore, Cookstown, Antrim, Dunmurry, Derry, Londonderry. They were, across the country. And we also had students and doctors from Africa, Asia, the Middle East and the Caribbean coming to Northern Ireland, it says here from the 1940s, but we know there were individuals who were coming from the 1920s. The 1940s, there was significant numbers. This picture at the bottom is a group of Ugandan students who attended Stranmillis College, and there was an exchange program that went on until the beginning of the Troubles, when a lot of this, if you like, was paused, a lot of that. So in terms of the exhibition itself, I know I don't have a lot of time, so I just want to sort of go very quickly what we talk about. We don't start with the transatlantic slave economy. We start with African history and African empires that spanned a very diverse and complex and rich continent. We don't want to start the story with the story of enslavement. So we talk about the exchange of knowledge and the exchange of information and those individuals that came in the very sort of early days. We do talk about the transatlantic slave economy. It's a common sort of story that because there are no ships that landed in Ireland, that we weren't, it's not our story, it's an English story. But we approached the fact that there were industries and trades, and we were part of the provisioner, the people who were sending over the shoes and the linens, and were taking the coffee and the rum and the sugar. So there was an involvement, and there's an economy that we benefit from. We also talk about that early presence. We talk about Tony Small, who was a companion. He saved the life of a very famous United Irishman, Lord Edwards Fitzgerald, who's very well known in Irish history, and he was his companion throughout his life until he was killed down in Dublin, and then he moved to England. We talk about Rachel Baptiste, who was a singer, an Irish singer. And we talk about other individuals, some of whom were enslaved people who escaped and found shelter with the United Irishmen because they were anti-slavery and they were abolitionists. And we also talk about something that's a very difficult subject. We talk about the Troubles. We talk about the fact that there were some of the soldiers that came. This is a very, very complex topic in Northern Ireland, but some of the soldiers who came to Northern Ireland were from African and Afro-Caribbean backgrounds, and the complex reasons why they joined the army, and the racism that they experienced. And of course, that's a very difficult topic for Northern Ireland, but it is part of our history. It is part of the story. We also talk about individuals like Raphael Ormeau, who was a doctor originally from Ghana, moved to Derry in 1939. His house, there's a little blue plaque outside it just around the corner from Ulster University in Derry. He opened a medical practice. He was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. This letter is an exchange that he had with William Du Bois. Absolutely fascinating man, and he spent time. He set up a research institute where he talked about anthropology and racism, and really deconstructed a lot of the myths at that time about race and culture. There's also a whole section about music, both religious and secular. This is one of my favourite stories because this lady, Nina Clinton, she came to Belfast in 1901, and I was able to connect with her granddaughter who lives in America, who's still a musician, and she had these beautiful handwritten letters that she wrote from Belfast describing the linen industry as an 18-year-old girl who was over singing with the Fisk Jubilee Singers, who did a tour of Europe at the time. Fisk Jubilee Singers first came to Northern Ireland in 1871. But she was with the crew that came in 1901. And this photo in the middle was taken in a Belfast studio, Allison's studio, which is a famous Victorian photographer at the time. And this was taken just after the death of Queen Victoria. Beautiful photo, but taken in Belfast. Sorry, I was about to sing there to you. There's a little visual there. And of course, the GIs I mentioned already. This little picture is of them singing in the Grosvenor Hall in Belfast. These other pictures, one was taken in Moneymore and one was taken in Cookstown, of them marching through the streets. So there's lots of photographic evidence and there's lots of stories, but they've just kind of been lost to history. We just don't talk about it because we've been so immersed in this kind of two communities narrative. As I said, we've had doctors, nurses, students, teachers who've come over the years, studied in our universities. But what we saw after the Troubles is the numbers dropped, and then it's almost like they were forgotten that they were ever here. So these pictures, these stories are all from the 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, and then we've kind of seen a drop off of those stories. And one of the legacies of that we touch on, we're probably going to touch more on this next story. So this is Nazareth Lodge, which is a mother and baby home. It's not really been something that's covered in our stories, but there are many mixed race children who were born to some of these visitors and children who've been raised in these homes. So as I said, exhibition is on, and I know my time is up. Exhibition is on. Please get down to see it. If you have any stories, contact us. There's our website as well. Do please get in touch, and we'd love to hear some feedback. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Naomi. It's an absolutely fascinating project, and I'm sure that so many people will on the call will take a lot from it in terms of things that they can use in their own work, and really excited to see the next stage. So I just want to invite Barbara, who's going to share a few insights on what we've heard so far. Barbara is a professor at Ulster University. Thank you, Barbara.
Everyone, thanks so much for joining us today. And yeah, I'm just going to kind of draw together really what our three speakers who've been talking about equality, diversity, anti-racism in the Northern Ireland curriculum in their three presentations. So just to kind of pull together some of the main strands here. Basically, you know, Rebecca was talking about how the current curriculum, yeah, it does have its good points, she pointed out. For example, the scope to integrate diversity and social justice, for example, in the citizenship theme. But there are big issues, and those issues are really about current representations and experiences of the global majority are dominant, and Black history only mentioned in terms of subjugation, not really about achievement. So moving on to Lucy, she's of course, you know, with the Transform Education review and looking to the future, it's really about, you know, how are we going to use this a new curriculum to ensure schools in Northern Ireland support EDI and anti-racism, and it is an opportunity. She mentioned taking this capabilities approach to human development, the idea of what people can do and what they can be, rather than the idea of achievement and achieving potential. And maybe this will support children better, in that often there are low expectations of migrant children's potential. So about developing the capability of being anti-racist, imagining a situation of another and having compassion for that situation. And the importance, of course, of having a knowledge-rich curriculum in the future, and one which is continuous rather than kind of disconnected, one that builds upon what comes before, rather than the emphasis really, she's saying, is that rather than adding on knowledge and skills about race and diversity, it's hoped that these skills and knowledge will be woven through the curriculum. And Naomi, really fascinating. She's basically saying there's, you know, we have to shift how we think about history in Northern Ireland, but also in the curriculum. And there's plenty of knowledge out there that is not being used in schools. It's about recognizing the past, but also the present. And basically, you know, if we do this, we will be able to, as Lucy said, give our pupils a kind of mirror where they see themselves, but also a window where they can see others. I suppose the big question is, you know, how do we actually start weaving this knowledge, these skills through the curriculum? And presumably it's about moving towards making this mandatory somehow, like they are doing in Wales. And definitely the new curriculum is the opportunity to do that. So yeah, I'd like to say a big thank you to all the speakers. Absolutely fascinating and so important.
Thanks, Barbara. It's great to have the key messages distilled from what we've heard so far, because it can be a lot of information. So we're moving to the second of our panels now, which is focusing more explicitly away from the curriculum specifically to anti-racism across the workings of a school and in education policy. So I'd like to invite Chris Jenkins from the Equality Commission, who's going to talk a bit about the priorities for anti-racism in education in the Equality Commission. So thanks ever so much, Chris.
Thanks very much, Rebecca. I hope you can all see my slides. If there's any problems, just let me know. But yeah, as Rebecca says, my name's Chris Jenkins. I'm a Senior Policy Officer at the Equality Commission. For those of you who don't know what the Equality Commission is, it's a non-departmental independent public body. Under the Race Relations Order 1997, we have duties to work towards the elimination of unlawful racial discrimination and harassment, and the promotion of equality, opportunity and good relations. And under Section 75 of the Northern Ireland Act, we provide advice to public authorities about their Section 75 duties around, again, promotion of equality of opportunity and good relations. And race equality is an area that we've worked on for a number of years now across many areas, education, but also housing, health, and a number of others. And today I'm going to speak about some of that work, specifically some of our recent analysis and policy recommendations within the area of education, and specifically around tackling racism and prejudice. So I'm going to talk a little bit about bullying, prejudice, stereotyping within schools, some of the data that we have on that or don't have on that. And then I'm very briefly going to touch upon the curriculum support for teachers, and also going to mention the new and upcoming racial equality strategy. So to start off with some recent data from the Department of Education, this slide shows the school leaders omnibus survey. So this is a survey that is completed by school leaders. And this shows bullying type behaviours that have been recorded per school within the academic year 23-24. And we can see, so firstly, this is for all types of bullying type behaviour incidents. So whether they be racist, whether they be motivated by prejudice against a different equality group, or whether they be related to social relationship breakdown, or whatever it might be. This is all types of racist incidents. And we can see that around 60% of schools said that they had less than 5 bullying type incidents, and between 30 and 35% of schools said that they had no bullying type incidents within their school within the academic year. The challenge is that this seems to contradict with the views of young people themselves. In response to the Young Life and Times survey, which is a big survey that gathers the opinions of young people, when asked, have you witnessed racist bullying or harassment in your schools, over half of young people said that yes, they had witnessed racist bullying or harassment. So again, this question is just racist bullying, so not other types of bullying, just racist bullying, over half saying yes. And we know that there's a significant body of research from Rebecca and her team at Queen's University and others that have gone into this in descriptive, in-depth, qualitative research that have demonstrated that this is a significant problem within schools in Northern Ireland. And yet that data from the Department of Education is not necessarily reflecting the scale of that. What other data does the Department of Education have within on bullying? And really, apart from that omnibus survey, there's not a lot. There's been some individual pieces of work that have been commissioned on different types of bullying, but there hasn't been a comprehensive survey on the nature and prevalence and scale of bullying in Northern Ireland since 2011. There is data that is routinely collected, as Rebecca highlighted, under the Addressing Bullying in Schools Act, but it is not routinely reported or collated by the department. There's no obligation to pass that data on to the department. So we don't have data, visibility, confidence about what is happening in school. And I think that makes it difficult from the department's perspective to allocate resources, but also to assess changing trends, impact of different programs over time. Rebecca mentioned the Addressing Bullying in Schools Act 2016, which was then implemented a few years later. I'm just very briefly going to touch on it. This piece of legislation, really important underpinning piece of legislation, provides a definition of bullying, which is welcomed, although the definition has limitations. It only talks about intentional acts of bullying, so it misses a whole category of unintentional bullying type behaviours. It creates duties on Board of Governors to take measures to prevent bullying. That's the creation of different policies, to review those policies, to communicate them, and then this duty to keep a record of all the incidents of bullying, including the motivation. But the challenge with this, and it's a similar problem to what I was talking about previously around data on what bullying looks like within school, we don't have confidence about whether this legislation is being implemented effectively or whether it's being complied with, because there hasn't been comprehensive research done on whether Board of Governors are aware of their duties under this Act and whether they're complying with them. There's been some work recently done by EA that does indicate a good level of awareness of the legislation, which is really welcomed, but it wasn't a comprehensive assessment. It was a self-reported survey. We need a really in-depth look to see whether this piece of legislation potentially a really useful lever and mechanism to address racism and prejudice in schools, whether it's being used effectively or not. And I don't want to create an impression by any means that the department and EA are not doing some really important work on this. They are. I think Rebecca also mentioned the work of the Addressing Bullying in Schools team within EA, who do really good work on trying to raise awareness of this legislation, supporting schools in how to respond to incidents of bullying within their schools. And we also know the department were very proactive in the wake of the recent racist violence in Ballymena over the summer, on the ground, doing really good work with schools in that area. So the department clearly doing work in this area, but the lack of data, both on the nature and prevalence of bullying in schools and on whether legislation is being complied with, is a real gap that needs to be filled. And by filling that would allow the department to take an evidence-based approach to appropriately allocate resources and to assess the impact of their different interventions to address this issue. I'm not going to speak about the curriculum in any real depth because it's been covered already, but just to say it's great to see the work that has been undertaken by Lucy and her team. It's really encouraging, some of the findings that she has, the observations that she has made on the need for inclusion, diversity, the need to look at representation, addressing stereotypes. I think from our perspective, it's just really important that those observations now carry through into the work of the task force. And I think Lucy in her video mentioned the importance of embedding equality and good relations throughout the curriculum. And that is something that we have been advocating for and really want to see carried through into the work of the task force as they come to making their recommendations. Particularly, where within the curriculum can we identify opportunities to address racism, prejudice, stereotyping, and to look at substantively reflecting the different identities within the curriculum. In terms of teachers, I wanted to raise some of the work that we've been doing around support and training for teachers, because again, it relates to both of those first issues around how to support teachers to tackle incidents of racism and bullying within their schools, and equally with this new curriculum, how to support teachers to be able to deliver that effectively. We know from some research and also anecdotally that many teachers in Northern Ireland feel that like they don't have the skills or the capacity, that they lack support to respond to some of these complex social challenges. And one of the things that we've identified is there really needs to be a look at continuous professional development within Northern Ireland. Our understanding is that teacher continuous professional development is largely voluntary. What tends to happen is that it's at the discretion of the principal. It tends to be a day or two per year that is set aside for a whole school approach to look at a topic. And that isn't really sufficient in terms of ensuring teachers are properly supported to deal with some of these complex issues that they might be having to respond to. So we're suggesting that there needs to be a defined number of hours for teachers to attend training per year, that there should be an emphasis explicitly on anti-racism training, and that we know the teachers want this training. This is not that it's difficult for teachers to engage in this additional training because of the lack of capacity, how stretched they are, the lack of time that they have. But that is why we need to look at how to ring fence time to appropriately support teachers to engage in this really important training. And very quickly, I just want to mention about the racial equality strategy. So the new racial equality strategy is due to be published at the end of this year, start of next year, we believe. And this is a really big opportunity. This is essentially the underpinning government document that is going to outline how government is going to take actions to address racial equality in Northern Ireland. We know that the previous racial equality strategy did not deliver as hoped. It's really important that this strategy that we get it right, and that there is leadership, coordination, and importantly that there's funding attached to this strategy. We know that with previous government strategies, ones that have worked well, for example, the Ending Violence Against Women and Girls strategy, have had ring-fenced funding attached to it. Without that, there's a real risk that this strategy ends up being a paper exercise and doesn't move the dial on this issue as required. Working with the TEO, we've also suggested there needs to be a real emphasis on prevention within the strategy. Yes, we need to have the robust response whenever incidents of racism happen, but we need to really look at prevention. And that's where education is such an important component that needs to be reflected within the strategy. We've said that there also needs to be an integrating of equality and good relations throughout public decision making. Section 75 duties, the duties on public authorities to consider and promote equality of opportunity and good relations. If those were to be integrated effectively across governments, that would go a long way to ensuring better outcomes for young people, and in terms of addressing racism and prejudice in Northern Ireland. We need to see those duties that are on public authorities being complied with and being effectively implemented. And the final point I would just want to make about the racial equality strategy is that it is a racial equality strategy. It is not a strategy that is tackling racism, hate crime, prejudice, as much as that needs to be a significant component of it. This strategy has to address wider inequalities, whether they be in education, whether they be in health, whether they be in housing, participation in public life, employment. This strategy is the opportunity to have targeted specific actions across those various areas, and to include specific targets as well, which the government needs to be working towards. So just to wrap up, those 4 different areas that I've spoken about: the need for high quality data and evidence, curriculum change, support for teachers, and a robust racial equality strategy. From our perspective, if we were to implement the recommendations that the Commission and others have identified within these areas, that would have a significant impact on the experiences of young people in Northern Ireland, and we hope that would start to move the dial on this really important issue. I think Rebecca's paper had the word urgency in it. We need to see greater urgency on this issue, and this is something that the Commission is putting a lot of priority and time in to ensure that we are supporting government as best as possible and to make the necessary changes.
Thanks, Chris. That was really, really helpful, and it's very important, and it has been important to us through our work as well, knowing the partnership with the Equality Commission to really move this work forward at policy level. So I want to welcome Erica now. Erica's a researcher at Queen's, and she's going to share her work on the experiences of young people in schools with respect to racism.
Hello everyone, can you all see my slides okay?
Yes, although they're not in presenter mode at the moment.
Is that in presenter mode now?
No.
No.
Are you working on 2 screens? Because that might be an issue. Yeah, you need to unplug one of your screens.
Okay. Okay, so I was previously working as part of the team led by Dr. Rebecca Loader, working on the research that examined the experiences of education among minority ethnic groups in Northern Ireland. So I have a QR code which you can scan to access the full report. It's included at the start and at the end of the slides. But today I'll be drawing on this study, and I'll briefly explore how the nature of racial microaggressions experienced by young people in schools is shaped by the unique context of Northern Ireland. Also looking at how the intersection of race and other attributes of young people's identities can also compound the marginalization that they face. And also we'll have a look at how educators may unconsciously perpetuate racial microaggressions. So racial microaggressions are the everyday forms of racism, sometimes intentional, sometimes unintentional, that communicate hostile or negative racial insults or slights against people from a racialized background. Racial microaggressions are multifaceted, and they're often shaped by the contexts in which they occur. As many of you know, Northern Ireland is a divided society wherein there are two opposing notions of whiteness, Catholic, Protestant, both tied to being settled. And our study found that these dynamics shaped the nature of racial microaggressions experienced by children in schools. So firstly, children born in Northern Ireland reported having their residency routinely questioned by their peers. For example, one primary school-aged child recalled how his peers would regularly ask him where he was from, saying, "Are you from Pakistan? What did you do there?" And this was a reoccurring question that he had to face in school. And reflecting on these discriminatory questions, he asserted, "Like, I was born here, but they still think I'm from Pakistan. So it's not nice." And when children's identity and residency in Northern Ireland were questioned, it reinforced the idea that being white and either Catholic or Protestant was the norm in Northern Ireland. And if not, you were marked as an outsider. And the exclusionary Catholic Protestant binary can also cause confusion for children from other faith backgrounds too, which you can read more about in the report. Secondly, children who had migrated to Northern Ireland also described how they were excluded by peers in school. Just to draw on one example, there were two young people who had migrated to Northern Ireland from Syria, and they stated that their peers did not seem interested in forming friendships with newcomer pupils such as them, since their classmates already had established friendships with so-called local children. They described how there were young people in their school who just want you to get out, will be against you, they don't want you. And racial microaggressions such as these can contribute to a young person's uncertainty about whether they are welcome, not only in school, but arguably in society more broadly. Thirdly, children from Irish traveller families also underscored how their community are positioned outside the dominant white settled binaries that shape Northern Ireland society, highlighting that constructions of whiteness in Northern Ireland are not confined to skin colour. My computer's making a lot of noises. Is everything okay, Rebecca? Or
If you just change display settings, Erica, click down on that.
Yeah.
Oh, it won't let you. It won't let you swap. So it's coming across fine. It's okay. Like, we can see
You just
it.
can't
So don't
see
worry.
it.
No, we can see it. We just can't see that presenter. We're seeing it in slideshow view. But just carry on. It's fine.
Sorry about that. No, what have I done?
I would just carry on because it's
Okay.
fine.
Okay, sorry. When it came to Irish traveller families, one child, for example, described her school environment as unwelcoming, reflecting the exclusion she experienced from her peers. And there was another example where a child shared how she had formed a friendship with a peer from a migrant family, and stated that unlike her white settled Northern Irish peers, this friend had not treated her like an outsider and was not scared of her, suggesting that this child found some form of solidarity with other minoritized peers. When it came to intersectional microaggressions, discussions with families revealed that the intersection of race and other attributes of a young person's identity, whether that was gender, class, English language levels, migration history, settled, non-settled, compounded the marginalization faced by minority ethnic young people. And just a few examples, young people reported their peers invoking tropes of Islamic terrorism, human trafficking, and child marriage. There were also newcomer or former newcomer pupils, as defined by Northern Ireland schools, those receiving or previously receiving English language support. They reported how their schoolwork was criticised, their intelligence was questioned, and their English language abilities ridiculed, and sometimes their spoken language policed by their peers. Microaggressions could also take on a sexualized manner when encountered by girls at post-primary school level, highlighting the intersectionality of racism and gender. For instance, a teenager of Indian heritage explained that a male peer had told her that he would never date a brown girl. Overlapping forms of discrimination were often experienced by children from the traveller community as well. And a lot of the families' counter-narratives or their accounts of racist bullying in school underscored how racial microaggressions are often complex, and that it's crucial for educators to consider other elements of an individual or a pupil's identity when attempting to better understand and tackle these less overt manifestations of racism when they occur in schools. Moving on to the third theme of educators unconsciously perpetuating microaggressions. So our study found that this sometimes happened, and then this often manifested through exclusionary practices, placing lower academic expectations on certain groups, enforcing more stringent disciplinary methods on certain groups. But due to time constraints, I'm just going to focus on some of the ways in which schools minimized reports of racist bullying when these were brought by families. So children and their families frequently experienced various forms of micro-invalidations, which is a form of racial microaggressions. And this was directed towards them by schools and educators. A concern frequently raised by families was that their testimonies about racism was disbelieved, and that their stories or their testimonies were viewed as less reliable than those of settled white Northern Irish, British, Irish families. There were a number of cases where families described how schools had responded to their reports of racism with suggestions that children were just telling tales. But the culture of disbelief had profound consequences for pupils, as revealed when some child participants explained that they did not see the value of approaching their educators when racist bullying had occurred. It also came at a cost to families engaging with schools when they were reporting racist bullying. For example, a mother described the emotional labour that she had spent in her effort to convince the school to take action in response to her daughter's experiences of racist bullying. After a series of meetings with the principal, she recalled how it was only when she was asked whether her concerns were not being taken seriously because she was a different colour, in her words, that the principal began to listen. And reflecting on her interactions with the school, she commented, "Sometimes I feel like people of colour, I think sometimes their concerns are not heard as much as if someone else had raised these concerns. And I think there should be a more open approach when they're coming with their issues." Overall, our study suggested that schools frequently demonstrated a reluctance or a hesitancy to address incidences of racist bullying among pupils as explicitly racist, instead categorizing them as more general bullying. And when we interviewed stakeholders and educators, some recognized this reluctancy among educators to discuss race and racism, suggesting that this might be because some teachers weren't always able to identify racist intent, or they were hesitant to do so. Again, just emphasizing the urgent need for anti-racism training. I just wanted to include this as well, that young people in our study often had to navigate racial microaggressions, and they deployed their own range of strategies. And this ranged from some children retaliating, which resulted in them being disciplined by educators rather than those who had initiated racist acts. Several children excuse their peers' behavior as, banter, a joke, or out of ignorance, or that it wasn't intentional. And most children approached parents or close relatives for support following racist bullying, although sometimes there was a delay from the incident occurring and then them talking to their family. And in our study, children were less likely to challenge racial microaggressions when they had been enacted by their peers for fear of being called a snitch, making things worse, or not being believed. Again, that theme of not being believed. However, children were more likely to resist racial microaggressions when they encountered it via teaching materials, or how these teaching materials were perhaps mediated by educators. I just want to end with some recommendations, but again, more detailed list of recommendations can be found in the report. But in relation to addressing racist bullying in Northern Ireland schools, our study highlights the need to introduce anti-racist training practices across education, policy, curriculum development, and teacher training. There's a need to ensure training addresses how racism sometimes intersects with other forms of discrimination. Also, that it's tailored to Northern Ireland's unique context. Also, that there's a need to strengthen arrangements for monitoring and reporting and responding to racist bullying, including racial microaggressions or these more subtle forms of racism in schools. Also, that there's a need to ensure that pupils and educators are supported in recognizing but also challenging racism in all forms, both structural, overt, but also subtle forms as well. Also, that there's a need to support reflective practices whereby pupils and educators can examine how white privilege operates in the Northern Ireland context specifically, and how this may impact minority ethnic communities. And finally, that there's a real need to centre the lived experiences of those most impacted by racism by involving minority ethnic pupils, their families and communities when shaping school responses. And there's the QR code again with a link to the report. Thank you.
Thanks, Erica. It's really great to have the experiences and voices of young people centred in this seminar as well. And I noticed that there's been some response to that on the Slido page. So thank you for that. I just want to now bring in Israel from Diverse Youth NI and the City of Sanctuary programme. And he's going to talk about his work and the work of the community sector in regards to anti-racism in education. So you're very welcome. Thank you, Israel.
Hello, everybody. My name is Israel Agwaugie, and I work as a coordinator with Belfast City of Sanctuary. I hope everyone can hear me all right.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. And am I sharing the right screen? Think so?
Yes,
Rebecca?
yes, that's working.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, that's it. So my name is Israel Agwaugie, and I joined City of Sanctuary since 2017. Today I won't be talking about a policy side of anti-racism, how it's embedded, but I will be talking about anti-racism embedded in practice, because I've listened to a lot of presentations here so far, and everybody's talked about the policy, how it's embedded in policy. So I'm going to talk about that in practice. So the repeating cycle of hate and complacency, let's look at that for a minute. Every year something happens, racist incidents erupt, outrage follows, and silence returns. This is on the grassroots level. This is what people are talking about. This is what people are expressing. Each cycle ends with short-term response and no structure or change. Nothing changes. It's just talk again, and then we're back to where we started from. And then let's look at the recent incidents in Ballymena, which reminds us that racism is systemic and it's not temporary. So last year, there was the Belfast one in South Belfast, and this year it was Ballymena. Next year, what's next? The danger is not only in hate, but in the normalization of this indifference. We must move from condemnation to dismantling the system that allows it. And this we can do through policy, which everybody has talked about. And maybe we should move this from add-ons to design principles, where anti-racism is too often treated as an add-on and compliance task. So everybody is talking about anti-racism, Section 75, etc. But why don't we look at it more in a co-designing of principles that works? Just like the racial equality strategy that's been going on without the input of people that are really impacted. This approach will change language, not the culture. Anti-racism must become a design principle shaping recruitment, policy, and practice. Every decision should ask, does this create belonging or exclusion? Why racism is structural, not simply social. Systems enable silence. Policies are still written, but about communities, but not with us. And that is the racial equality legislation that we just talked about. Real change requires accountability and measurable impact. Anti-racism must be built into governance, funding, and evaluation frameworks. So this is exactly here the work that we do at City of Sanctuary becomes very important, because we might not be directly informing policy change, but our work with Education Authority, where we go into schools and promote the culture of welcome, inclusion, and safety, working with teachers who haven't worked with young people or children from ethnic minority background before to understand these cultural differences, and also working with young people to understand the difference between asylum seeker, a refugee, a migrant worker, and not just everybody in one pigeonhole. So that's some of the work that we do. So let's look at Belfast City of Sanctuary and what we do in general context. So we embed this inclusion across schools, colleges, libraries, councils, and workplaces. At the moment, I can proudly say that we have 91 schools of Sanctuary in Northern Ireland. And this work has been promoted and funded by the Executive Office through some of their projects, including the Urban Villages Project and also the Good Relations Project. We work closely with the Education Authority. Our work with the schools is not about changing the policy, it's about promoting the culture of welcome to ensure that the schools are welcome to young people and children from ethnic minority background. So we have one College of Sanctuary, which is Belfast Met. Those in Belfast would agree with me that that school has really supported a lot of asylum seekers, from the Syrian scheme to the Afghan scheme. That is the first point of call, from ESOL languages to students progressing into universities. And today we also have a University of Sanctuary, which is Queen's University. In their civic engagement work, we can see that they are helping us, supporting us to promote a culture of welcome, inclusion, and safety across Belfast, hosting their morning cafe every month. Morning cafe here, they bring in speakers from education to community safety to engage with the people from ethnic minority backgrounds. Apart from that, we host the annual Refugee Week picnic, which is a living classroom, as we want to describe it, of welcome and belonging. To us, education becomes the front line of anti-racism, where we would like it to replace fear and with understanding. So, in other contexts, I work with Diverse Youth NI, which is a youth-led organization. But I'm not going to talk about this because I have a colleague from Diverse Youth who is going to expand on this, expatiate on this a little bit for us. But let us go back a wee bit to what anti-racism looks like in the community. How will that inform the work that we do in the community context, from policy to real stories that we hear every day? Before I leave hand over to my colleague, I'll leave us with this sad story, unfortunately, of Suha. Suha Ahmed, she is from Sudan, attended multiple appointments at the hospital. When I say multiple appointments, not even given appointments, but she would go to A&E and request to be seen by a doctor. She constantly complained of the pain in her hip. From time to time, nobody listens to her. Nobody listens to Suha. Nobody wants to hear what's wrong with her. Nobody wanted. All she was given was paracetamol and sent away. At some point, she demanded for a scan to be carried out. That scan wasn't carried out. It was awful. She continued to complain about that pain till October 2024, when she
I think there's an issue with Israel's feed. Israel? It looks like Israel's frozen, so perhaps the best thing to do now, and we'll invite the representative from Diverse Youth back when they can come on. Oh, is Avinov, are you there? Okay, would you like to speak? Oh, you're muted. We can't hear you. Can I suggest for the moment that we move to Charlotte for reasons of time, and then we'll come back to you, hopefully. So while we're hoping to get past some of those technical problems, can I welcome Charlotte Carson from the National Education Union to speak about their work with developing an anti-racism framework. So thanks very much, Charlotte.
Hello there, thank you. You'll let me know if you can't hear me. So my name is Charlotte Carson. I am with the NEU in Northern Ireland, and we're very fortunate that the NEU is a very proactive union in trying to equip our members to learn about racism, and we've developed this anti-racist framework that has been distributed to all of our schools or all of our members. It really is written for an English audience. So what I've tried to do, and and I'm in the process of adapting this, it's an ongoing piece of work, is to sort of adapt it for the Northern Ireland audience, for Northern Irish teachers. And I'll explain how I've done that in a moment. But just to link to something that was Chris said before, and also Erica, that we need teacher training. I mean, that's really what this is about. We can make frameworks, but they can sit on people's shelves and be ignored, for term after term. We need teachers in physical spaces together or online spaces together, discussing, conversing, and learning from each other. So I think we need to look at putting pressure on the ETI to make this part of an inspection framework expectation. As Chris said, about the amount of time allocated for teacher training, specifically, on bullying and specifically on racist bullying. So my background is that I'm part of the NEU's international organising forum, as well as a rep here in Northern Ireland. And as part of that, we get to learn a lot about different campaigns, but the focus on, international issues. But also, that includes our Tackling the Far Right campaign at the moment. And I was fortunate enough earlier this year to be part of a delegation to Poland, where we visited Warsaw and we visited Auschwitz. And as a result of that, when I came back, I delivered a short training to some members in Belfast and subsequently to other members. And we're continuing to offer this as an ongoing program. But as Chris said before, this is all voluntary. It's our members invite us into school to deliver this. But this is just a really inspirational piece of writing that I think all of our teachers need to keep in mind. And this was a letter to a teacher by Haim Ginott, who he says, "I'm a survivor of a concentration camp. My eyes saw what no man should witness. Gas chambers built by learned engineers, children poisoned by educated physicians, infants killed by trained nurses, women and babies shot and burned by high school and college graduates. So I'm suspicious of education. My request is this: help your students become more human. Your efforts must never produce learned monsters, skilled psychopaths, educated Eichmanns. Reading, writing, and arithmetic are important only if they serve to make our children more humane." And we start our training from that point of view of thinking, our role in the classroom is to develop citizens who will contribute to our society and who will, be good people ultimately. Where am I going here? Yeah. So the NEU also provides specific tools on promoting Black history and, magnifying magnificent Muslims, as that piece says. And I was really delighted to hear from Naomi Green earlier, and hoping to connect with her to see how we can get her resources into our schools. So we use these terms, Black being the political term, the 1970s term that represents Black, Asian, Caribbean, minoritized people. And I'd say a lot of teachers in Northern Ireland wouldn't be familiar with that, the concept of Black as a political term. So, the teacher training it's a really great opportunity for teachers to learn a little bit about, anti-racist education before we expect them to be able to deliver it. We explore our barriers that we think schools might put up to sort of say, well, we can't deliver anti-racist education, or we don't have a racist problem in our school, or, the barriers that they present. And obviously, the intersection between racism and classism is huge. And we definitely want to keep that in mind, throughout our training. That the biggest barrier to a child's achievement is their socioeconomic status. So our whole school approach is from leadership, teaching and learning, the voice of pupils, well-being and a sense of belonging in the school, and of course, connection with community. So the way that we start the training is to get teachers to think about, how they feel about certain things, So we do a kind of a silent debate where we put these statements out and ask teachers to write something in response to it. We should purposefully teach controversial issues. What do people think about that? I mean, obviously, my background is as a citizenship teacher. So when you're teaching citizenship and you're teaching history, you're very comfortable with that. But a lot of teachers wouldn't be. They wouldn't be comfortable dealing with controversial issues. So we have to think about how do we provide adequate training to help those teachers, feel confident. That statement, there is a difference between promoting respect for diversity and being anti-racist. What if a school thinks, well, we have a culture day where everyone, shares something from the culture. Is that not enough? So it's about understanding, the limits of some of those promoting diversity events, and how we also need to embed an anti-racist approach alongside that. The importance of belonging, and we talk a lot about, and I've heard previous speakers mention belonging again and again, and I think that comes through, as a huge kind of feature of our training as well. What are schools doing to make every student feel like they belong there, whatever their background, whatever goes on at home? Do you feel good in this school? Do you feel part of this school community? Because that is so it's so important for children to feel that sense. And like, for example, one of those statements says, if parents are racist, there's not much schools can do to challenge it. But but actually in the classroom, in the assembly hall, you know, students can learn to think for themselves, to develop their own ideas, to be critical of what they hear at home if it is racist. So it's so important for us to feel empowered, that our schools can be these, you know, places where they have power within themselves. So this is how I kind of turned the English version of the framework into a more Northern Ireland friendly. And it's really a series of questions for teachers and school leaders to answer and to discuss and to identify gaps. And it goes from, you know, obviously having a policy, curriculum time, and is the curriculum led by teachers who are confident with this material? We know that in the past, lots of that, you know, lovely citizenship curriculum that you referred to earlier in this webinar, that wasn't actually translated into school practice. It remained words on a page because it didn't have teachers teaching it who understood it, who valued it, and who were confident to deliver it. So, you know, having appropriate teacher training, specific teacher training on citizenship issues is really important. Obviously, you know, the inset across the curriculum. What do we know about racism in our school? And this goes back to what Chris was saying about the lack of data. I mean, the very idea that a school would report that they have zero bullying in their school, you know, we all know that's not true. But how do we gather information? How do we record incidents of racist character? Are we specific that, you know, an incident happened that was, you know, was used racist language? You know, how are we actually recording that? Do we have a restorative approach? Do we help students learn from their mistakes? And does our school ethos help to build culture and tackle racism? And where's the other questions? Are we connecting with local organizations? Do we teach our student leadership team or our peer mentors how to deal with racism? Because actually, you know, those students are an asset within our school, so they should be trained in, you know, in anti-racist education as well. Thinking about uniform policies, what do we do with parents and families to help them feel part of our community? Do we host events which give families an opportunity to share their home culture for others to learn about that? Sorry about that. And global citizenship, you know, are students learning about global citizenship? Are they getting a chance to do things together and to feel that sense of agency and power together? Because children learn confidence through doing stuff for others, through being part of group experiences, and we can offer that to them clearly through the curriculum and through extracurricular events. And also learning from our primaries, who tend to do belonging better. I think that's maybe a big dangerous statement to throw out there, but I think primaries tend to find this easier than secondary, so we need to learn from them. And I just want to finish with this lovely statement. Esther Brunstein, who I learned about on my trip to Poland, she survived the Holocaust. She became an anti-fascist activist in Britain, where she moved after the war. And she said that her ability to rise beyond hating other people or hating those that had done, you know, the crimes to her family was because of her experience at school. And it's a reminder to teachers that we can build like compassion and resilience in our children that will last them their whole lives. And, you know, I think that's something that we should be so positive about. Should feel like we should be proud to work in schools where we're, you know, building happy, humane, caring children, and that will help them survive throughout their lives and help them contribute to society as good citizens. So I just want to finish with Esther. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Charlotte. The NEU resources are fantastic, and I really hope that people who are part of the seminar will be keen to engage with you and engage with them, because they're so valuable. I want to go back to Abhinav. Hopefully, Abhinav, we can hear you now, and just to talk about the work of diverse youth. And so we'll probably go over by about 5 minutes or so, but we'll keep the closing very brief for those who are watching. So thanks for your continued engagement, and thank you, Abhinav.
Yep, perfect. Am I audible now? Yes. So yes, very quickly, I am going to talk about diverse youth, the background of what we are trying to do in terms of complementing education, especially anti-racist education in schools. So, just sorry. So we basically work at the intersection of youth empowerment, social justice, and education. So as much as we are a youth club, a youth center, a youth-based organization, we also work very closely with many schools across Belfast. And the way in which we work, the kind of policy or the trajectory of that work is more or less influenced upon the complementing of anti-racist practices and educational frameworks in schools. So very simply, it would be like taking some of our projects like No Room for Hate and myth-busting workshops that challenge the misinformation that is existing in the society at the moment. And we do simple workshops or even diversity day celebrations at schools. And it has come with a lot of positive feedbacks in terms of how it has challenged the narratives, challenged the perceptions of young people with regards to some simple terms like refugees and asylum seekers, and even to the greater concepts of what exactly is the concept of anti-racism and how it is manifesting across us around our society. So understanding this migration training framework, it builds awareness into behavior change, and that becomes, like Mr. Israel had said during his previous presentation, it becomes a starting point for us. Education, we believe, is the best starting point in terms of anti-racist frameworks, designing anti-racist frameworks. And we also kind of organize conferences, BME youth conferences, where we like to showcase young leaders wishing for equality and representation. And we encourage young people, especially those from minority ethnic backgrounds, to come above and speak their opinions. And unlike the usual designs of conferences where you have office holders doing the presentations, in these conferences, we tend to give the space to the young people, especially these young people that come from minority ethnic backgrounds, to speak. So the panel sessions, the keynote sessions, the keynote speakers, all of them would be young people with a lived experience, talking to the agencies, talking to the authorities about what exactly is their experience and what they feel needs to change. Basically, what we believe is stop treating anti-racism as a short-term emergency, and that comes in line with what Mr. Israel was saying in his presentation, where he was capturing the work, the essence of Belfast City of Sanctuary. More often, we find that anti-racism is an add-on rather than a design principle. And to challenge this, to get over, to compete, to get over this sort of narrative, we believe making cultural competence a core professional standard could be the way ahead. Ensure minority ethnic youth representation in decision-making. And we do it at Diverse Youth and I by campaigning, designing campaigns with the young people at the forefront. And it's them who design with their lived experience, with their opinions. And we sort of facilitate platforms where young people can take these campaigns, take their opinions to office holders. That includes politicians and also agencies like the Equality Commission, who spoke earlier here at the session. And we also believe in embedding accountability and long-term funding for anti-racist education. Like Mr. Israel rightly mentioned, we often find that something has to happen for us to react. And anti-racism or designing anti-racist educations and frameworks is something that we have seen. There is a cycle going on, something happens, there is a lot of noise, and then everything goes silent. And to sort of get over this, to jump this barrier, I believe long-term funding, especially for schools, as well as organizations that are working in this sector, would be the way ahead. And moving from symbolic inclusion to a structural inclusion would be a key solution. And to round off, I believe silence is not neutrality. There's complicity every time something happens. We believe to choose silent, if we believe to remain silent, would be the best option. I believe it is complicity, just taking the sides of the perpetrator. And anti-racism, it must live in classrooms, councils, and communities, because wherever racism lives all around us in all dimensions of our societies. There is not a week that goes by in diversity where we don't have young people coming to us and reporting racist incidents, or maybe even minor hate incidents. It could be in schools, it could be in playgrounds, but the fact is racism lives all around, and anti-racism, the frameworks that we're trying to design, the policies that we are trying to come up with, it must live in these classrooms, these playgrounds, these councils and communities. Belfast City of Sanctuary and Diversity, then I believe, are very good examples that show that consistency breaks the cycle. You pitch up partnerships with schools, you consistently engage with these young people, and we have seen the change that has brought about in their perceptions, in their thought process. And we believe that true progress is measured not by words, but by how deeply we design for equality. And that comes down to the fact that most often when we design, we forget for who is the community that we are designing for. Unless and until you have someone with a lived experience, unless and until you have someone from the community that is often subjected to racist remarks, subjected to racist attacks in Northern Ireland without the consultation, any racial equality or review policies that we come up with, I feel, is incomplete and inadequate. On that note, I'd like to conclude and once again reiterate that as a youth organization, what Diversity and I always does is to create a culture of welcome, inclusion, and diversity. And the way we have done this is obviously there's a lot of learning that goes on in the schools. Education happens a lot in schools, but there is also the informal settings like playgrounds and youth organizations where the child, the young person learns a lot more. And we believe that these youth organizations, these external spaces need to also become culturally competent. They also need to be a part of this anti-racist educational frameworks that contribute to the greater development of the child. On that, I'd like to conclude. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Abhinav. That is such an important point to finish on about and that's one reason why we're keen to involve Diverse Youth NI and the City of Sanctuary, because it's those areas outside formal education systems that are so important and really where we can begin to engage in different ways as well. So I just want to close the session there before I hand over to Marlon, and I'd like to thank Aisling for being gracious enough to give her summing up over to hearing fully from the other presenters, which we thought was really important. Thank you ever so much to everybody who's participated, who's attended today. I think it's been such a full session, and hopefully it will only be the beginning of these opportunities to come together to share experience, knowledge, practice. This will be made available in the BERA website, so do signpost other people to it who might be interested in this. And I hope that people in the seminar and on the call will find ways to connect with each other, because I know we've already heard about people finding inspiration from what others are doing, and that's exactly what we wanted to do. So Marlon, if I could just hand over to you to conclude.
Yes, thanks very much, Rebecca, for that summary. And I just want to thank all of the speakers that you brought together. What a fantastic collation of knowledge and expertise. And in this 2 hours, I've learned so much about the Northern Ireland context that I didn't know before. And I'm now able to take this knowledge and make that relatable to what I've done across Scotland, England, and Wales. And hopefully with you, Rebecca, our next step is to sort of put together a review article for Research Intelligence that will aim to sum up some of the key findings from this particular session. But no, I've just been completely inspired by the progress that's been made through anti-racist research in Northern Ireland. There were many problems. We've heard about the problems, difficult problems, especially with racist bullying occurring in schools and almost like the suffocation of children's voices in speaking. That's a massive concern that I noticed there. But in terms of prospects, the work that is being done, particularly with history, it's a big thing for me, history, the work that's been done by Naomi there. I mean, there's an opportunity for the curriculum review to work with bodies such as that to sort of incorporate really rich examples of history that can bring people together to understand their sense of being and their sense of existence. So there were some fantastic opportunities, and I'm really glad that we did this session online, because we've got this recorded now and we can always make reference to it. Whilst with the other seminars, they were face to face, and it's nice to do that, but we don't record them. So this one's online, and we can make reference to this on the BERA webpage. Thanks very much once more, Rebecca, for bringing this together, and thanks everybody for talking. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, have a good rest of the afternoon. Goodbye. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.